cafeteria on a rainy Tuesday smelled like bleach, soggy French fries, and cheap floor wax. All Leo wanted was a seat near the window, a warm plate of chicken tenders, and 20 minutes of silence to finish his history notes. He was 16, wore oversized sweatshirts to hide how thin he was, and carried a worn leather notebook that belonged to his grandfather. Leo wasn't the kind of kid who looked for trouble. He was the kind of kid who walked with his head down, counted the floor tiles, and hoped the world would forget he existed until the final bell rang. But high school cafeteria floors are unforgiving, and when a heavy scuffed boot stepped deliberately into his path, Leo's plastic tray tilted. The plastic plate slid, gravity took over, and a paper cup of cherry soda splashed across the polished leather of Marcus Miller's brand new retro sneakers. The entire back row of the cafeteria went silent. It was that sharp, collective intake of breath that happens right before something ugly breaks open. Marcus didn't shout immediately. He just slowly lowered his foot, looking down at the red syrup dripping onto his clean white laces, his face twisting into a cold, practiced smirk. Beside him, Julian and Carter, his two shadow-dwelling lieutenants, instantly leaned in, their eyes lighting up with the cruel excitement of predators who had just been handed a free pass. Marcus looked up, met Leo's wide, terrified eyes and smiled. It wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of someone who had just found his afternoon entertainment. Leo stammered out an apology, his voice cracking mid-sentence as he dropped to his knees, reaching desperately for paper napkins to wipe the shoes. But Marcus didn't step back. He deliberately brought his heel down right on Leo's outstretched knuckles. The pain shot up Leo's wrist, sharp and burning, but he didn't scream. He just pulled his hand back, pressing it against his chest, staring up from the floor. Marcus leaned down, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper that barely carried past their small circle. He told Leo that apologies didn't buy new shoes, but respect did. He grabbed Leo's leather notebook off the floor, flicking through the hand-drawn sketches and faded handwritten entries with disdain, before shoving it into his own jacket pocket. If Leo wanted it back, Marcus said he'd have to earn it. And the price was simple. Show up at the abandoned brick works on the edge of town after final bell or the notebook, and everything inside it would end up in the river. What Marcus, Julian, and Carter didn't know was that the notebook wasn't just a collection of class notes or random teenage doodles. It was the last surviving record of Leo's older brother, Sam, who had disappeared 4 years prior without a trace. Sam had been a star athlete, a bright student, and the pride of their broken family, until the night he walked out of a high school party and vanished into the fog. Every map, every timeline, every interview Leo had painstakingly conducted over 48 long months was contained within those yellowed pages. To the bullies, it was just trash to leverage power over a fragile freshman. To Leo, it was the only tether he had left to a brother whose voice he was slowly starting to forget. When the final bell chimed at 3 o'clock, the rain had turned into a steady, gray downpour. The abandoned brick factory sat at the dead end of Old Mill Road, surrounded by rusted chain-link fences and overgrown weeds that smelled of damp earth and rot. Leo stood outside the broken iron gates, his hands deep in his pockets, his shoulders shivering against the cold wind. Inside the hollowed-out main room, where crumbling red brick met decaying steel beams, Marcus and his friends were waiting. They had set up a folding chair, flipping a coin back and forth while laughing about how long it would take the fresh meat to show up. When Leo stepped through the shattered doorway, the laughter died down, replaced by a tense, mocking satisfaction. Marcus stood up, tossing the coin into the air and catching it cleanly. He pulled the leather notebook from his coat, dangling it by its spine over an open oil drum half filled with rainwater and floating debris. He told Leo that if he wanted the book, he had to get down on his knees and apologize again, this time on video. Julian raised his phone, the camera light burning bright in the dim, dusty air of the warehouse. Leo stood motionless. His voice, usually quiet and hesitant, suddenly lost its tremble. He didn't ask for the book. He didn't offer money. He simply looked Marcus dead in the eye and asked why Marcus's father's name was written on page 42 of that very notebook. The smile evaporated from Marcus's face. He froze, his arm still holding the book over the dirty water. Carter shifted uncomfortably, looking between Marcus and the strange, unbothered expression on the younger boy's face. Leo took a single step forward, his wet shoes squeaking against the slick concrete floor. He explained that his brother hadn't just disappeared out of thin air 4 years ago. Sam had been meeting someone at this exact brick factory the night he vanished. And according to the old sheriff's notes that Leo had transcribed into that book, the last phone call Sam ever received came from a landline registered to the Miller household. Marcus's knuckles turned white around the spine of the notebook. He shoved Julian's phone away, his bravado instantly souring into defensiveness. He claimed Leo was lying, that his dad was a respected businessman in town who had nothing to do with some forgotten trash town cold case. But Leo didn't back down. He pointed out the faded copper spray paint on the wall behind them, the exact same color and tag that appeared in the background of the final photo Sam had posted online before his phone went permanently dark. The factory wasn't just a meeting spot for local bullies. It was a crime scene that the town had spent 4 long years trying to bury. Julian and Carter began to look around the high-ceilinged room with sudden unease. The shadows seemed deeper now, the whistling whined through the broken window panes sounding less like nature and more like an accusation. Marcus tried to regain control, raising his voice, threatening to drop the book into the soup right then and there. But before he could loosen his fingers, a heavy, metallic clang echoed from the back corridor of the factory. A sound so loud and resonant that all 4 boys jumped. It wasn't the wind. The sound came from the heavy iron fire doors that led to the lower basement vaults. Doors that had been welded shut after the brickworks went bankrupt in the late 90s. Leo didn't run. Instead, he pulled a small, silver key from his pocket. A key he had found sewn into the lining of Sam's old winter coat just 2 weeks prior. The key didn't fit any door in Leo's house, nor did it belong to any lock at school. But as Marcus stared down at the key, his face drained of what little color it had left. He recognized the shape of the brass head. It was an old industrial master key, stamped with the logo of Miller Construction, his father's company. The tension in the cold warehouse became suffocating. Carter turned to Marcus, asking in a hushed, panicked voice what was going on and why they were really out here today. Because it hadn't been an accident. Marcus hadn't picked a fight with Leo today over a spilled cup of soda. Marcus had targeted Leo the moment he saw that specific leather notebook sticking out of Leo's backpack during morning homeroom. The spilled drink in the cafeteria was a staged pretext to get Leo alone. Away from cameras, away from teachers, and away from his family. Leo took another step, his heart hammering against his ribs, but his eyes remaining steady. He asked Marcus what his father had promised him in exchange for bringing Leo out to the old brickworks today. Marcus swallowed hard, his hands beginning to shake slightly as he held the notebook. He tried to laugh it off to regain his posture as the top dog senior who ran the hallways, but the confidence was entirely gone. He admitted, in a voice barely louder than the rain, that his father had noticed Leo asking questions around town the past few weeks. His father had told him that Leo was a delusional kid trying to ruin their family's reputation, and that Marcus needed to clear out the notebook before Leo went to the state police. Before Marcus could say another word, the sound of footsteps echoed from the darkened hallway leading into the main bay, heavy, steady footsteps echoing on the concrete. The 3 seniors spun around, Julian dropping his phone as a beam of bright flashlight hit them square in the face. A tall figure stepped out of the darkness, wearing a dark waterproof jacket. It wasn't Marcus's father. It was Sheriff Thomas, the lead investigator who had closed Sam's missing person file 2 years ago, declaring it a runaway case despite the family's desperate protests. The sheriff didn't look surprised to see them. He looked exhausted, his face lined with deep crevices of fatigue and regret. He looked at Marcus, then at Leo, and finally at the leather notebook resting in Marcus's trembling hand. The sheriff told the boys to put their hands where he could see them, but he wasn't addressing Leo. He walked straight past the trembling seniors and picked up the notebook after Marcus accidentally dropped it onto the wet floor. The sheriff didn't arrest anyone. Instead, he pulled an official police document from his inner pocket and handed it directly to Leo. The paper was an updated forensic report, stamped just 6 hours prior by the state crime lab. For 4 years, everyone believed Sam had run away because of a hidden stash of cash and a missing car. But the report revealed something the local department had hidden for nearly half a decade. Sam's car hadn't been stolen. It had been towed from the riverbed 3 miles downstream just 48 hours after his disappearance, stripped of its vehicle identification numbers, and buried under a false filing code by the department's former chief, Sheriff Thomas's own brother-in-law. The realization hit Leo like a physical blow. The mystery of his brother's disappearance wasn't a cold case of a teenager fleeing a small town. It was a cover-up constructed to protect the people who held power in their county. Marcus's father hadn't tried to retrieve the notebook to protect a business secret. He was trying to protect himself from being implicated in an illegal dumping operation that Sam had accidentally uncovered while exploring the factory 4 years ago. Sam hadn't died in a fight or a tragic accident. He had discovered toxic waste being illegally buried beneath the town's water table, an operation run jointly by Miller Construction and local officials. Julian and Carter, realizing the scale of the situation they had blindly walked into, immediately stepped away from Marcus. They stammered out that they had no idea about any of this, that they just thought they were helping Marcus intimidate a freshman who had ruined his shoes. Marcus stood isolated in the middle of the bay, looking small, defeated, and terrified of the consequences that were about to crash down on his family. He looked at Leo, not with anger or malice anymore, but with a desperate, pathetic plea for silence. Sheriff Thomas turned to Leo and told him that the state police had already raided the Miller Construction headquarters 20 minutes ago. The missing pieces Leo had compiled in his grandfather's notebook, the dates, the truck license plates, the landline logs, were the exact evidence the state investigators needed to break open the blue wall of silence that had kept the truth buried for years. Leo hadn't just saved his brother's memory. He had unraveled the dark secret that had held the entire town hostage for a decade. As the blue and red lights of state trooper sedans began to flash through the rain-streaked windows of the abandoned brickworks, Leo took the leather notebook back from the sheriff's hands. He held it close to his chest, feeling the damp cover against his palms. The bullies who had pushed him around in the cafeteria, who had tried to crush his spirit over a spilled drink, were led out into the rain to give their statements to officers who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Leo walked out of the factory into the cool evening air. The rain was finally beginning to let up, leaving clear reflections in the puddles along the gravel drive. He opened the notebook to the final blank page, pulled a pen from his pocket, and carefully wrote down the time and date. He didn't write out of anger or revenge. He wrote to complete the story his brother had started, knowing that truth isn't something that can be erased by loud voices, expensive shoes, or dark rooms. True strength isn't found in the ability to dominate others, but in the quiet courage to stand up for the truth when everything around you tells you to remain silent.